This is Talking Netflix. I'm your host, Rascal F. Kennedy.
I'm James Preston Poole, lead critic for Full Circle Cinema.
And I, Mark Tan, the managing critic of Full Circle Cinema.
We are going to discuss two things that actually just popped up out of thin air. Transformers, the war on Cybertron, which unfortunately does not have one of the great Optimus Prime speeches, and Project Power. I think we all agreed to talk about War for Cybertron, the trilogy. So from what I'm seeing so far, it's got 7.6 stars on IMDb. It's an animated series set in the world of battling Autobots and Decepticons. So far, from what this looks like, it's like a prequel to the Transformers movies. I'll go ahead and let Mark start off with this.
I want to sketch out my own personal connections with the Transformers series because I think it's gonna explain how I reacted to this the way I did. I've known about the Transformers for a while. I had a lot of the toys when I was a kid. The stuff I've watched for Transformers includes some of Generation 1, the Generation 1 movie, and all of the live action stuff, including the most recent one, Bumblebee. For the longest time, I enjoyed some of these Transformers material, some more than others, of course. Like, I'm definitely not going to be the one that's going to defend most of the live action ones. Certainly in terms of the animated stuff, it was always enjoyable, but never did it seem anything more than just mere entertainment. This is the first Transformers property that I've seen probably ever where I actually was really engaged with the characters in the story. This installment in the trilogy, which is called Siege, it's all about the relationship between the Autobots and the Decepticons. And while you could say that for most of the incarnations where you could say that relationship is just good versus evil, this is the first one probably ever where it just seemed like two different sides of the same coin, because this is one of the few times where we really see how they've been developed and how much more gray it is. It's not the case of pure good versus pure evil, although there are some characters on both sides that might slip towards both pure good and pure evil. But the thing that I like most about this show is how much it fleshes out almost every single character to the point where they really feel like full nuanced beings as opposed to just symbols for certain archetypes. Like, if you were to focus on the Decepticons, you really learn about how sort of broken they were because the Autobots kind of took over their lives, and how in some respects even the Autobots, you could say that they're not the do-gooders that they position themselves as in other versions of Transformers. So overall, I think this is probably my favorite incarnation of Transformers since Generation 1.
That's definitely high praise. I very much enjoy all of Transformers to some sort of degree. I have a soft spot for 3 out of the 5 Michael Bay movies. I love Generation 1 and a few scattered animated series here and there. But the fan base has kind of been asking for a series like War for Cybertron Siege for a while. And while we're only 1/3 of the way through it with Siege, I'm pretty satisfied. I think it's an excellent show in its own right, and it's an even better Transformers show that has the seeds for some interesting plot lines to develop down the line. A lot of how I feel about this series is going to depend on chapters 2 and 3.
I can agree there. So far, it's read like a prequel to the films for me, which the prequels after the regular movies, they just pretty much go downhill for me. But in terms of War for Cybertron, I actually thoroughly enjoyed it because, like Mark said, it gave you two sides of the coin. It showed you why the Decepticons have been so pissed off in all of these movies. Megatron and Starscream are definitely some psychopaths. It shows you that this is why the Decepticons hate the Autobots. I mean, if we've learned anything from the history of the world, anytime someone is liberated from slavery, they either try to kill their captors or find a way to live in harmony with their captors, or they leave. But in a sense, in this, it was clearly a war. Decepticons felt like they were shysted. They want to take over Cybertron and build the Cybertron that they want to live in. It's just odd because of how Megatron goes about take over Cybertron.
I agree with both of y'all about how interesting the dynamics are, particularly with the Decepticons. It is unfortunate to me that they didn't try and give Starscream and Megatron the same kind of characterization they gave some of the other characters. But one of the more fascinating parts of the War for Cybertron story is seeing characters kind of flip-flop between their allegiances. Without going into spoilers, there were definitely a few reveals that caught me by surprise.
We're definitely going to talk spoilers before we end this pod.
In fact, one of the fan favorite characters in this whole franchise, Bumblebee, he's not really for the Autobots versus he's just a scavenger just trying to get by. And he just happens to slowly fall into allegiance with the Autobots. But yeah, this is the first time in a while where I've seen Bumblebee be his own person.
Because even in the Bumblebee movie, he was just, trying to fulfill his mission, which anytime we've seen him in the movies, that's been his thing. Protecting Sam Witwicky, helping Haley, trying to do these things and protect these humans, and to actually see him outside of that element in this cartoon was pretty awesome.
I think part of it is just the fact that we spent the past decade or so just seeing Transformers movies where Bumblebee just never talked. This really does call back to the earlier iterations of Transformers where he really had the strong rebellious personality and he talked a lot.
Honestly, it's my favorite iteration of Bumblebee because he's such a vibrant character. He brings the personality. He's the X factor to the group.
They really take that to another level in this one. Do you mind if we seek into spoilers real quick?
Sure.
Let me finish my thought about Bumblebee real quick without spoiling, but they give Bumblebee a very important role that is more important than anything he's been assigned in the Transformers movies. And it makes his character more important as a plot device, and I'm interested to see how that develops.
I agree. So, grades, guys. Mark, what do you give it?
I've spent most of my time just praising this show. The only reason why I'm not going to go absolute top marks with this is the animation is a little bit rough and choppy, even for what it is, given that the whole show is just a bunch of robots fighting each other or talking, in which you're not really supposed to have the most fluid animations. But even knowing the people behind this, like Rooster Teeth, like Polygon Pictures, the people who actually animated it, it did seem like the budget on this show was a little low, which explains why some of the action scenes seem a little more choppy than I'm used to with the Transformers series. But overall, I would give it a solid recommendation. It'd probably be about a 7 out of 10 in my book.
Yeah, piggybacking off of that, it's an easy 7. I actually was right about to bring up the point that Mark just brought up. The quality of the animation is a little lacking. Not all the way through for me, but there is a definite lack of exciting action sequences, which is one of the reasons you go to Transformers. But I still think that Transformers War for Cybertron Siege provides enough interesting groundwork for this conflict between the Autobots and the Decepticons, and tells a good enough story on its own that it's an easy recommendation for people who are interested in the Transformers property, and a good jumping on point, really, for anyone who's wanting to get into Transformers.
I agree with you guys to an extent. I actually enjoyed the animation, but the only reason that I say that is because I feel like the animation was very gritty, and I know that this is why 7, but it actually met my standards for the Transformers as far as how I would like the picture to look. Whenever I think of Transformers, I think of a very gritty, robots fighting each other and just outright going to war. They're shooting missiles at each other, for Christ's sakes. So I did like the animation. I have to disagree with you guys as far as the animation goes, but everything else, I do wholeheartedly agree. I give it a 7, and I hope that 7 gets a little bit higher as we get to the third and final chapter of this series of Transformers cartoons. If you haven't watched War for Cybertron, fast forward, go to Project Power, leave us be so we can be chatty.
Rascal, did this interpretation of Optimus Prime live up to your very notable expectations for the character of Optimus Prime?
So far, yes. And the only reason that I say that is because it seems like he's fairly new to his leader position. So he's still trying to grasp how to navigate. We get him in the Transformers films where he's just like, hey, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. This is what's happening. Nobody tell me anything. And I feel like you do have to kind of gravitate to that. Like I've said before, I feel like this is a prequel, but I definitely feel like this is what happened before all the other characters arrived in the films.
A big reason why this feels like a prequel to the follow-ups, such as the live-action films, is that Optimus Prime definitely feels like a newbie in terms of being in a position of leadership. In fact, he even has to still answer to Ultra Magnus, who is the actual leader of the whole Autobots, as we see in these first two episodes. So yeah, that take's totally valid.
So what did you guys feel about Bumblebee?
Oh man, the whole reveal that he was Bumblebee in the second episode was so good. Because I was like, okay, they're introducing us to this rookie character I'm not going to care about, and it's supposed to be the relatable one. They're like, oh, this Transformer's name is Bumblebee. I'm like, yes. That was satisfactory enough. As the scrappy newcomer, he could have filled that role. But whenever he's imbued with the power that Ultra Magnus had within him, that's kind of a game changer. And it kind of changes the size of the role that Bumblebee has or will have going forward in the series.
I feel you though. I didn't realize it was Bumblebee. And then whenever they announced it, I was at work whenever I was watching this. So I had to be very, very quiet. But I definitely did the Tiger Woods fist whenever they revealed that that was Bumblebee. I don't know how I feel about Ultra Magnus.
Ultra Magnus is a good example of what works about the show, is how much it fleshes out the complications of this conflict on Cybertron. At this point, they're so tired. Everyone has a different idea of how to bring this war to an end, but he throws everything on the line to go and try to make peace with Megatron. And of course, it blows up in his face. But it was interesting, because usually when a character does that, they're treated as a traitor, but the Autobots all kind of understand why he made the choice he made. I thought that was interesting. And you said you don't know how to feel about Ultra Magnus, and I kind of feel the same way, and that's kind of interesting. You don't get that feeling a lot with characters in Transformers.
And it's especially true considering some of the things that he does do once he essentially gives himself up to the Decepticons and some of the information he gives to them. It's like, on the one hand, when you first see him do stuff like that, I definitely questioned some of the stuff that he did, and I was almost ready to call him the T word that you mentioned earlier. But the longer it goes on, and certainly by the time we get to Bumblebee gaining some of his knowledge, you definitely see that what he had to do, he pretty much had to do it, or else they would just lose completely.
It's a very slippery slope with Ultra Magnus because this is the first time that we've never really known exactly how to feel about a character, but his actions are actually justified, which is weird because you're going to the enemy and you're basically giving them the impression that Optimus Prime doesn't know what the hell he's doing. So you're going to try to make peace with a group of psychos led by Starscream.
By going there, even though he knows they're psychopaths, Ultra Magnus still kind of appeals to this idea that since they were all comrades, right, and they all fought together before the division of the Autobots and the Decepticons, there's this idea of brotherhood still between all the bots. And it's interesting to see kind of the legacy of another war feeding into this war, and that still colors some of the relationships between them.
You know who we haven't talked about? Alita. But she was actually a very interesting character because she was one character that actually challenged Optimus Prime. Like, she didn't challenge him and then like walk away. It was, Optimus, what's the plan? You're in charge. You have to call the shots here. And she kind of brought the leader out of Optimus Prime that I'm guessing we're going to see in the next 2 installments into War for Cybertron, especially, you know, like towards the very, very end. Whenever they were leaving on the ship, it seemed like she was the reason that Optimus is at the level that he's at, because she didn't take everything he said like his word was bond. She took it and she questioned it and she made him make the hard decisions. And that was just pretty cool to watch because not many of the Transformers get him to do that. It's always Optimus just making the decisions and nobody questioning him. But in this, you actually had Elita questioning him constantly.
And the other thing of note with Alita 1 is that not only does she get Optimus Prime to truly step up and be the leader that he needs to be, she also seems to have a really solid drive just herself. Once we get to the final episode, she basically is a leader of the Autobots that are on Cybertron, And when it gets to the point where most of the Autobots have to get away from the area, she's the one who says that she's going to hold up the fort as the battle rages on in Cybertron.
I think we end on a really interesting note with Optimus and crew kind of scattered from the rest of the Autobots. And I'm excited to see where the story goes and if it links up with the movies or Gen 1. But I'm definitely in. But as I said before, it's all dependent on what they do with parts 2 and 3.
I do agree. 2 and 3 will dictate how we feel about 1 whenever this is all said and done. It'll definitely control how we feel towards this entire saga that they're putting out on Netflix. It's definitely interesting, and I'm excited to see where it's going to go, but we shall see what happens.
Yeah, I don't really have that much to say that I didn't already say earlier. This particular season, Siege, is definitely interesting. I hope that I feel the same way for the next 2 seasons. Yeah, I basically don't have that much negative to say other than I hope that the people at Rooster Teeth and Polygon Pictures step their game up in terms of the actual animation. Not so much the character designs or the art direction. I think that's actually pretty fantastic. It's just the way they moved kind of bothered me the whole way through, even when the actual material that was on screen was really interesting.
This is definitely true. I guess we all have different thoughts on the animation, but we all agree that this is definitely a 7 out of 10 so far, and we will definitely be coming back on Talking Netflix to talk about the last 2 installments. So I guess now we will go ahead and move over to Project Power. It has a 6 out of 10 on IMDb. When a pill that gives its users unpredictable superpowers for 5 minutes hits the streets of New Orleans, a teenage dealer and a local cop must team up with an ex-soldier to take down the group responsible for its creation. This was directed by Henry Joost and Ariel Schulman, written by Mattson Tomlin, and starring Jamie Foxx, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and Dominique Fishback.
I really wanted to like this one more than I did. The first 2/3 of Project Power are the good stuff. It's exactly what you want. It's got a great concept. It's shot gritty. It gets ridiculous. It's got all sorts of fascinating, goofy side characters. But then it gets really conventional. And I completely lose interest. And a movie that I was having a lot of fun with becomes something closer to Extraction.
For me, it was pretty okay, but it's clear that this is definitely the kind of movie you would only really see on a streaming service like Netflix as opposed to something that you would see in theaters because it's pretty slickly directed given the small scope, and I do like most of the actors involved. I would actually have to disagree in terms of how I engage with the narrative because while you're certainly right that the movie gets more conventional as it gets to the third act, I also think that for the first half, I wasn't really able to understand what was going on in terms of the basic plot of it. I definitely was able to get the small details of it, and I do like that it builds this world by showing all the different powers that one could have by taking the drug. I was definitely engaged by that. But in terms of the actual characters, for the most part, I actually was able to engage with it a little bit more once it got more conventional. In that first half, it was trying to do so many different things at once, introducing the world, introducing the superpowers, introducing the characters played by Jamie Foxx, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and Dominique Fishback. And this all kind of happens at a pretty quick pace. And for a while, I was just wishing that the movie would calm down a bit. Thankfully, it does happen at the halfway point, and after that, I was able to enjoy it from then on. But you're definitely right in that it's a pretty inconsistent movie. It's going to be hard for me to imagine remembering this movie in the next couple of months or so.
I feel like Netflix is searching for their blockbuster film, and they've been doing it for a while. Ever since they've been pumping out these original Netflix movies, it's turned out to them doing it like once a month, and they haven't exactly been able to find it. I mean, we've seen Extraction, we've seen The Old Guard. There's some of those movies are there. The Five Bloods was there, but then whenever they get to the actual action movies, it's like they can't do anything with these films. I'm actually the opposite of James. I disliked this movie until it got to the end. The whole first and second act, the best thing to me was Chica whenever they were at the school. And once you get to the third act, kind of watching everything unfold, that was pretty awesome to me to be able to see, where the pill comes from, how the pill actually works, for them to explain it. They elaborated on it, but they weren't talking about tackling the stock market. They were talking about being underground and tackling the black market. So I feel like if you take the ending of Project Power and the beginning of the Old Guard and you kind of mesh that together, then you get what Netflix is looking for. But as of right now, it's either hit or miss, and they've been missing bad.
Netflix really hooks us with these awesome concepts. You're like, oh, cool, Immortal Warriors. Sure, I'll watch this for a couple hours. I already have Netflix. Oh, cool, drug that makes someone have superpowers for 5 minutes. Sweet, I'll click on it. But the problem is, these ideas, they kind of just always give you the bare minimum. They put it into really familiar narratives, which is fine in and of itself, but it never goes the extra mile. The fact that for Netflix movies, The Kissing Booth 1 and 2 notwithstanding, we have to wait for someone like Martin Scorsese or Spike Lee or Vince Gilligan to make something really worthwhile. It's kind of irritating. I don't know what Netflix's deal is because they used to be such a harbinger of creative freedom, and for TV shows, they still kind of are. I've just found myself being really disappointed by their blockbusters.
It's funny that we brought up movies like Extraction and The Old Guard along with this movie because, yeah, I too was thinking about what would the ideal Netflix movie be like. Because I think all three of these movies have their positives to them. I think this one has the most interesting visual style to it, especially when you see certain characters take the pill and we see certain imagery of how they feel as they start getting the superpowers. And we also see how some of these superpowers manifest. For example, one of them basically spontaneously combusts. We have another one who grows essentially weapons out of their limbs. We have another one who can essentially has no real bones and kind of can move their body any which way they go. So it clearly has something there. And in stuff like The Old Guard, it has a good premise and it has good characters. And with Extraction, it has some really solid action sequences. But in terms of all three of them, I would say that the story is pretty lacking. And in the case of Project Power, this is just a test run for the writer to sort of make his impression amongst other producers so that he could get the screenwriting jobs that he really wants. In the case of this particular screenwriter, Mattson Tomlin, he was able to get the screenwriting gig for The Batman with the script that he got for this. So clearly, it's almost like this movie is just a means of an end for the people involved.
And that's what sucks. Netflix goes out, they grab these, sometimes they're very, very, very legendary directors and screenwriters, and then sometimes it's, someone who's up and coming and they're just looking for a quick gig to get over the hump really quick. And then they grab these young directors, young writers, and then they throw out these big name actors at us. And they expect these movies to just wow us because, we have Jamie Foxx and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Enjoy. And I don't know, I guess they think the audiences are dumb. But in their defense, I think that's a lot of studios these days.
In the ways that studios kind of de-emphasize banking on movie stars, Netflix has kind of gone all the way in that regard, which is interesting to see and kind of reminds me of something out of the early 2000s. I probably shouldn't have compared this movie to Extraction because I enjoyed it. It was decent. I didn't hate my time with it. But I'm also a fan of Henry Joost and Ariel Schulman's prior work. Their 2010 documentary Catfish is incredible. Paranormal Activity 3, one of the best in the series. Nerve, really fun, creative thriller that sidesteps a lot of the issues that this film faces. So I don't know what it is about Netflix that enforces this house style on these creatives, but every movie they've released that wasn't The Five Bloods or The Irishman has basically just felt like something I would watch on HBO on Sunday afternoon. It's Sunday afternoon core, basically.
I brought up Nerve earlier, and that was the thing that actually got me interested in seeing because, like you said, it's this really solid movie that simultaneously plays around with real world issues, particularly with how teenagers interact with social media. But it's also in a movie where it's basically just this insane game of truth or dare, except there's no truth this time, and it's the most ridiculous stunts you could probably do. And I could see how those filmmakers would get a job like this. It's just that without all its story, creative choices they do, it kind of feels a little bit empty. And I can definitely say that because I don't really have any opinion either way on any of the main characters. They were just the characters. I didn't really get much out of them except for maybe Robin for the one scene where she talks back to her teacher through a rap, but even then, it doesn't really amount to anything.
Definitely. And I feel like that's something that we haven't really touched on is Robin. I actually liked Dominique Fishback as Robin. She played the timid young kid who was doing something that they had absolutely no business whatsoever doing. And I feel like that was pretty cool. Now, the one thing that I do hate about this movie, before we go ahead and grade it and move on, I hate the fact that they sold Machine Gun Kelly bit. Like, Netflix tried to just hand us that. Like, it's one of the things that I've been seeing on Twitter, like, constantly. It's like, hey, look at this fight scene between Machine Gun Kelly and Jamie Foxx. And it's like, bro, nobody cares about Machine Gun Kelly, if we're being completely honest.
He's only in this movie because he was also in Nerve.
He was like a dark web assassin or something in Nerve. It's so weird. They keep on trying to make Machine Gun Kelly a thing in terms of acting in these genre projects.
Yes, Bird Box, The Dirt. It's like they're really trying to make him a thing.
It's very annoying. I guess if you're going to stop rapping, go make movies.
I guess Eminem feud sent him straight to Netflix.
Hey, he has been doing some work with Netflix, man. It'll be interesting to see if he gets his own lead in a movie.
Oh God, we're gonna have to review that, aren't we?
We might let some substitutes step into talking Netflix for that.
Well, it'll be all guest hosts.
I don't see myself sitting down for that one. Grades, guys?
If ever there was a perfect 5, this is it. Right in the middle.
If the second half flipped around, I would probably be at a 5 as well. But given that it slowly gets a little bit more comprehensible and a little bit more engaging as it goes on, even if it never gets to a point where any of it's memorable, I would give this one a 6. I would like to see the directors and this writer do interesting projects. As far as just this particular movie, it's fine. I don't have any real negatives towards it that make me really angry, but there's nothing in it that really stands out. The movie even tries to have a sort of oneer where it's essentially following Jamie Foxx fighting a bunch of people while the camera is in this closed off point and it kind of circles around, but even then it doesn't make much of an impression. But yeah, other than that, it's enjoyable. It's fine. James said it perfectly when he said that this is perfect afternoon viewing, and there's not much else I can say about it other than that.
I have to go ahead and give this a 5.5 because at a half a star was definitely for the fight scene with Machine Gun Kelly. He is a wonder, and I cannot wait to see his Netflix film. He's gonna wow us, and we're gonna be like, "Yo, we slept on him."
It really shows just how little Project Power had an impact on us, that we just kind of stopped talking about Project Power and started talking about what Netflix's next big hit is going to be.
Basically use Project Power as a way to just talk about the action movies that they've been making this past year.
I'm fine with that.
It's like the one thing that they lack in is action movies. Like their romantic movies, their dramas, their TV shows. It's all cool. If it's not like really good, it's decent. And then we get these action movies, and it's just like, man, for what? Like these are all things that could have been kept, and you could have given them to us later. But less. Here we are. They just need better writers. It's not even. I can't even blame the directors because the directors and the visuals are actually pretty amazing. It's all on the script. Like find someone young and hungry. I'm sure we'll see something amazing.
It feels like Netflix just acquired a bunch of mediocre spec scripts and are like, all right, we can produce these for like 50 million each. People will watch it if we put big enough stars in, which I mean is working for them numbers wise, but eventually people are going to catch on.
I guess now that that's over with, guys, we're going to have to unfortunately end this wonderful pod about this wonderful movie, Project Power. No, I'm being very sarcastic right now. Anyways, Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna leave you guys with that. If you haven't watched Project Power, you can definitely go ahead and watch it, and you are definitely okay to tweet us. James, what's your Twitter handle?
My Twitter handle is at James P. Poole.
Mark, your Twitter handle?
Your handle is natcrem92796.
And you can always tweet me at Rascal F. Kennedy. If you guys have any disagreements with anything that we have said, we'll definitely hear you out.
Send us your favorite Machine Gun Kelly movie moments.
Unfortunately, our sponsors, Netflix, won't allow us to talk about our next pod, but you'll just go to the Full Circle Network, scroll down a little bit, and I promise you will see it. Good night, guys.